In 1492, Christopher Columbus landed his fleet of ships in Hispaniola, an island just east of Cuba and southeast of Florida. He claimed the New World for King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella I of Spain, a country in Western Europe. For the next 400 years, Spain would take over much of the Caribbean, North America, Central America, and South America. The most important part of their growing empire was Cuba. The island of Cuba had excellent ports, rich farmland, and many natural resources like iron ore, copper, and salt. The people of Cuba were treated terribly by the Spanish who were in control. Many were killed off by war and disease, while thousands more were forced into slavery. Even more people were brought from Africa to work as slaves in Cuba. Many Cubans fought back against their unfair treatment, and there were several large slave revolts, or times when slaves fought back against their masters, from the early to mid-1800s. One leader, a woman named Carlota, led one of the largest slave rebellions in 1843. More and more, independence was on the minds of Cubans. The revolution to break away from Spain officially began on October 10, 1868, when plantation owner Carlos Manuel Cespedes freed his slaves and declared war against Spain, starting the 10 Years' War. The goal of the war was to free all of the island's slaves and to create an independent Cuba that was free from Spanish rule. The 10 Years' War ended without a clear winner on either side, but moved Cuba closer to independence from Spain. Spain signed a peace treaty, or document that ended the fighting, with the Cubans in 1878. The treaty said that Spain would work to make a new government that gave Cubans some say in how the country was run, but Spain never kept this promise. The years that followed were not good for Cuba, since Spain continued to neglect or ignore the island and its people. Roads and schools fell into disrepair, and the Cubans grew increasingly poor and desperate. People who were suspected of supporting the freedom fighters were punished and forced into reconcentration camps. In 1895, Cuban rebels once again rose up against the Spanish government under the leadership of a new national hero named José Martí. Many Americans heard what was happening and signed on with what was called the Cuban junta to help. The junta was a group of powerful people from Cuba living in the United States when war forced them to leave the island. The junta worked hard to support the people fighting in Cuba. It helped raise money for the fighters, organized rallies and parades to get public support for the Cuban cause, recruited and trained soldiers, and bought guns, ammunition, medicine, and other important supplies in support of the war effort. Another way that the junta helped was by renting or buying ships to sneak soldiers, money, weapons, and other war materials from the United States to Cuba. These important supply boats were commanded by local captains who knew Florida's coastal waters well, were not afraid of danger, and knew their way around Cuba's coastline. These smuggling trips between the United States to Cuba were called filibusters. Filibuster is a word that was used in the late 1800s to describe a person who wanted to help overthrow a foreign country's government. A filibuster could act alone or as a member of a large group. Many of these groups were formed by refugees, or people who had fled the country where the fighting was happening, like the Cuban junta. Filibuster ships played an important role in Cuba's War of Independence, since they supplied the rebels with most of the equipment that they used to fight. But the trip to Cuba was very dangerous, and the crews of these boats could find themselves in serious trouble if they were caught. In one instance, a ship named the Virginius was captured by the Spanish warship Tornado off the coast of Cuba in 1873. The crew was charged with being pirates by the Spanish government and sentenced to death. 53 crew members of the captured ship were shot and killed before the British government stepped in to save the rest. Spain finally agreed to release the 91 surviving sailors as long as the United States agreed to stop future filibustering expeditions to Cuba. The United States agreed to these terms, and filibustering became illegal, or against the law, from then on. However, these laws did not stop future filibustering expeditions from happening. The Cuban junta continued to raise funds for the rebels fighting back home, and supplies continued to be sent from American ports like Jacksonville and Tampa to the war-torn island where they were desperately needed, even though it was against the law. The Commodore, measuring 123 feet long and weighing 178 tons, was regarded as the finest filibuster ship. Driven by a single steam engine, the Commodore was capable of maintaining 12 knots for over a week, which in those days was very fast. Built in Philadelphia, she was purchased by the Cuban junta and sent to Jacksonville, Florida. On December 31st, 1896, the Commodore set sail on an illegal trip from Jacksonville loaded with 15 tons of guns, ammunition, and supplies in rough seas. Her trip was anything but smooth sailing. Commodore ran aground twice and damaged her wooden bottom before ever reaching the Atlantic Ocean. Once at sea, the crew discovered the ship was leaking. Unable to bail the water, Captain Edward Murphy ordered his crew to abandon ship. By early morning, the survivors watched as the Commodore sank approximately 12 miles offshore of Daytona Beach, with men still upon her deck. Among the crew was young author Stephen Crane. Traveling as an undercover newspaper reporter for the New York Press, Crane found himself in a 10-foot dinghy or small boat with the injured captain, the cook, and a crewman named Billy Higgins. The four men spent over 30 hours struggling to reach shore near Daytona Beach. Crane made famous his shipwreck experience in the short story The Open Boat. He describes rowing towards the only thing he could see on the vast horizon, the lighthouse at Mosquito Inlet, also known as Ponce Inlet. Crane describes the light as tiny as, quote, the point of a pin, unquote. Thanks to the help from filibuster ships like the Commodore, the Second Cuban War of Independence was much more successful than the first one. The steady stream of men and supplies from the U.S. allowed the rebels to achieve many victories over their Spanish enemies. With the continued help of the Americans, the Cuban people found themselves closer to victory than ever before.